The Great Barrier Reef has lost half its corals within 3 decades. A lot of Australian marine life is suffering the consequences of human ignorance. From the coral bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef to the, now abandoned, I think, plans of drilling in the Great Australian Bight. This lack of care stretches to the mainland too, the government not doing much to incentivize renewables. Mining corps have destroyed protected indigenous land for their profit, giving a pathetic apology as an afterthought. It's a shame. Australia is a country with many natural wonders. I just wish our government cared more for the country than its individual pockets. Our descendants are fucked. Yet our government doesn't give a shit. It's infuriating as an Australian to see how little the government cares about protecting the unique environments we're so lucky to have in our country. Huge thanks to Rupert Murdoch and the mining companies for keeping these arrogant pricks in power, but a large share of the blame also goes to the apathetic Australian voters for not educating themselves. One positive I'm hoping will come out of the current pandemic is maybe people will start to finally pay a bit more attention to politics and they will start to see how damaging these right-wing governments can be. Still half left? Sounds like a challenge. We need a sad version of an upvote. And a lot more environmental protections. I watched that new David Attenborough doc on Netflix. It's harrowing to say the least. He tried to put a positive spin on things at the end, that there's still hope, but even he looks a little defeated. We have vast numbers of people who are still actively denying a problem even exists, let alone what we should do about it. I'm just so lost. I was 11 at the turn of the millennium, and I remember feeling like humanity was stepping into some great future, and it's all continued to go rotten. I'm only in my 30s and I'm just so worn out. Haven't been to the Great Barrier Reef, but have snorkeled a fair bit in Hawaii and the Caribbean. It is really terrible to see the reefs now compared to 15 years ago. Heck, the reefs used to be almost as beautiful as the fish. I don't know how PPL with children can ignore this. So what, have you seen how great the economy is doing? /s. Australia is that country that does a ton of shady shit and has one of the worst environment track records, but never gets called out on. It's the equivalent of a good-looking rich mean girl in high school. If I had a bunch of money and could do anything in the world, I would be getting fragments of corals that are dying and have a small coral farm that I could slowly build up and add native corals back into their own habitat. I keep small polyp stony corals, SBS, and you'd be absolutely amazed at the delicate and precise level of chemistry required to keep SBS corals alive. Alkalinity has to be as stable as possible. If alkalinity swings more than 1 dkh in 24 hours, corals usually bleach and die within 2 weeks. The pH of seawater is also incredibly important. The pH of the ocean used to be 8.3, but is now down around 8. When pH falls down below 7.8, corals die and their skeletal structure starts to slowly dissolve. So we have reduced the ocean by a pH of 0.2, and 0.3 more and everything will melt and die. Nearly halfway there. Now, what causes the ocean pH to drop? Well, pH is the measure of how acidic or alkaline a solution is. Carbon released by your car merged with oxygen and forms CO2. CO2 is what they use in soda/pop to make it acidic. That fizzes slight burn you feel? Yeah, that's an acidic solution. You remember the science fair that showed the effect of pop on human teeth? And how leaving human teeth in pop can dissolve your teeth? That's exactly what is going on here. We are releasing tons of CO2. The ocean keeps itself oxygenated by the function of gas exchange at the surface of the water. The whole reason fish can live underwater? Their gills take oxygen and other dissolved gases out of the water. And all of that comes from gas exchange at the surface. So our oceans are absorbing our CO2. As they absorb the CO2, they become more like soda/pop, which is to become more acidic. And like your teeth, at a pH acidity of 7.8 or lower, corals stop growing and start dying/dissolve. We can measure the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Globally we are around 415 ppm. Okay, So if our air is causing such acidic problems with water, how does someone have a hobby of growing coral? Well, I have a Gatorade bottle full of soda lime, and I constantly circulate air through it and then use that air to oxygenate the tank. This helps scrub the water of CO2, and thus raises the pH. But goodness, why not just dose the ocean with something to boost the pH? Well, you can, but only a little bit. Any chemical dose to a tank to boost the pH also tends to drastically increase the alkalinity. And remember, you need to keep the alkalinity as stable and relative as possible. So raising pH also raises alkalinity, thus killing off the corals anyway. It's a very delicate balance in which all actions have a reaction. So you have to find solutions that fix the problem, but don't alter something else. And that's why this problem is so difficult to solve. However, there have been recent studies that show manganese might help protect corals against climate change, just a little. Manganese supports photosynthesis. Corals are a symbiotic organism and require zooxanthellae to produce energy for the coral. Increasing photosynthesis allows the algae growing in the coral to boost the consumption of CO2 in the water, and algae inside the coral doing more photosynthesis means more consumed CO2 within the coral and may be what's helping protect corals more. Furthermore, corals are an animal that gets its necessary elements via osmosis. They're an osmotic species. When corals need to grow bone, they take calcium carbonate out of the water, and build their skeleton. At a pH of 8.2 or higher, corals can directly and more efficiently take calcium carbonate out of the water, and stick that molecule on their skeleton and grow. Below a pH of 8.2, corals have to utilize an extra chemical process to get that element they need to grow their skeletons. So 8.2 or higher they grow and recover faster because it takes them far less energy to do basic life functions. This is why climate change is undeniable and so important. For me to keep coral alive, I have to build a CO2 scrubber with soda lime to remove acidic CO2 from the aquarium. We cannot do this with the ocean, not at scale. This is why reducing our carbon output is so necessary, as well as finding ways to remove existing CO2 out of the air. Now, after all that depressing stuff, I'll leave you with a fun fact. Dosing a shot of vodka to a tank of corals is beneficial. I won't get into why. But I'll tell you that I'm getting my corals and fish a little tipsy. Don't worry, our governments will fix it by building more coal terminals in QLD. Coal, it's what fish crave. I wonder how people are causing damage to our Earth. We need to understand now, else the end won't be too far. I think industry needs to slam on the brakes until they solve their pollution issues. Switch to renewables and run exhaustive surveys of the surrounds for impact. Now is a good time to do it too, the economy is already tanked. The measures that we would have to take in the next few decades would be far worse than what we have to do now. There is a petition to fuck the Murdoch press off out of Australia. If you believe in a free and independent press, I suggest you sign. https://www.f.gov.au/petition_sign, ID equals N1938. Anyway, an average person can help. I'll never forget scuba diving there in 2008. One of those disappointments that'll stick with me for life. Holy shit. All within my lifetime. A little science behind corals and coral bleaching. The reason why corals turn white when the ocean becomes polluted or the ocean temperature rises, aka climate change, is because of a mutualistic relationship it has with symbiotic bacteria living within it. The rising temperatures and pollution actually kill the bacteria, which in turn weakens and ultimately kills the coral. The white color comes from the loss of its bacterial buddies.